Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Okay. Specifically po, tayong three overarching objectives dito sa ating human rights protection training for human rights action officers. Of course, the first is to provide you with the necessary skills that you will be using as human rights action officers to capacitate you. Second is to standardize altogether the human rights protection training program of the CHR. This is the first time we are holding this as a test to be implemented and improved. Third is to start engaging and organizing our human rights education center trainers. Yun yung mga LaSalle students ngayon who will be acting as our resource speakers on human rights laws, overseen by the good attorney Milabel from LaSalle. No? So, before we do that, mahalaga po na intindihin natin itong kinagagalawan natin bilang mga human rights defenders, human rights action officers. Sino po ba dito yung nakatanggap na ng human rights training, yung seminars dalawa na hinold namin sa Muntinlupa? Unang mga kamay. Opo. O, pakitaas po. Okay. So, opo. Nasa minority po, kasi this will be a repeat, more or less, of yung basic grounding on human rights. So, ulitin lang po natin ngayon at mahalaga din naman na ma-refresh tayo kung bakit mahalaga yung pagtataguyod ng karapatang pantao. So I'll be presenting the state of human rights and the prevailing conditions in the Philippines. No? Okay. As the person said, human rights are actually the foundations of a life of dignity. So minsan, pag sinabi nating human rights, parang napaka-detached niya from other social issues and concerns. No? Human rights, patungkol sa torture, patungkol sa arbitrary arrest and detention, patungkol sa judicial killings and enforced disappearance. Pero actually, napakalawak po nito at siya ang sumasaklaw sa lahat ng aspetong gawain ng sangkatauhan. Partikular, ang mga nagseserbisyo sa atin, ang ating gobyerno. No? So, mahalaga ito upang sa gayon, masiguro na meron tayong isang makatao at disenteng pamumuhay. So, medyo mahirap naman kung kani-kaniya tayo na magsisiguro na makamta natin ang isang life of dignity. Kinakailangan ipagkatiwala natin ang ating resources, our collective interest, to a select few. Basically, those we popularly choose to represent our interests, and these are our representatives in government. So yan yung mga ipinakatiwala natin na ating taxes, ang ating natural resources, as well as human resources, ang ating mga manggagawa, mga magsasaka, upang sa gayon ay mapanggaan ang kanilang mga karapatan at security of persons. No? So merong tatlong mahalagang tungkulin ang ating state representatives, no? Public officials, be it at the national level or at the local level, yung sinasabing trinity of state obligations, no? Respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. No? Respect the right not to torture, for example, protect our security, no? And of course, fulfill our economic, social, and cultural rights. So, obligation ng ating public officials, persons in authority, to actually put in place laws, policies, and practice, and even make sure that institutions and the infrastructure and services that should work for the ordinary citizens o karaniwang mga mamamayan. So that the foundations of a life of dignity will be realized. In other words, so that human rights will be realized, no? So overarching po yung human rights, no? So sa lahat, halos lahat o lahat ng aspeto pala ng ating pamumuhay, pasok ito. Itong requirements for a life of dignity. In politics, the arts, sports, business, in policing, military operations, legislation, of course, the administration of schools, of our criminal justice system, family life, health, sector, medicine, social protection. And because governance, our government is the overarching regulator in all these social spheres, the full respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights is very much dependent on good governance. So good governance is the realization of the requirements of a life of dignity or human rights. Dito pa lamang nako-correct na yung misconception na ang Commission on Human Rights ay isang implementing agency. In fact, it is all government agencies and all branches of government that should work to fulfill, respect, and protect human rights. Ang Commission on Human Rights is there to ensure that they do their jobs. Okay. Good governance is therefore synonymous to the state performing its duties towards all claim holders, fairness, and equity. Okay. So as we, duty bearers, no, public officials, ensure the right to security of persons as we rove, do our rounds in the barangays as tanods, for example, then we fulfill the right to security of person. When we intervene in cases of domestic violence, ensuring that the rights of women are protected and fulfilled. Rights of children are protected and fulfilled. No? When we legislate laws, both at the national and local level, that provide persons with disabilities with access to places where they need to be or to go, will fulfill the rights of persons with disabilities. No? So, hindi pala bago ang human rights work sa atin. In fact, without us knowing it, we are actually fulfilling and protecting and respecting human rights. No? So, just a few examples of human rights reflected in our national laws. No? Of course, our 1987 Constitution, Philippine Constitution, is very strong on the protection of human rights. The Labor Code of the Philippines is, of course, an expression of the respect, fulfillment, and protection of the rights of workers. And also the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law of 1988, the UDHA, Magna Carta of Women, the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act, which later will be tackled also, the Anti-Torture Act of 2009, the International Humanitarian Law Act, and the Universally Accessible, Cheaper, and Quality Medicines Act of 2008. This is on the people's right to health. Yeah. Okay, silipin po natin ang ating 2008 national budget. Timbangin po natin ang performance ng ating gobyerno. No? So, noong 2008, ang napunta po for our right to health was 4.2 billion. A decrease from 4.7 billion in 2007. Right to education, 643 million, a decrease from 5.2 billion. No? Colleges and universities, 930 million from 1.13 billion in 2007. No? Pero contrast this with what was allotted to debt service. We'll be discussing that later in detail. Pero debt servicing in 2004 consumed 81% of government revenues. No? 2005, 89%. So that means capital starvation in terms of providing for the most basic needs of the people. Like for the right to health, the right to education, nabanggit ni Chair kanina, yung right to the commons, access to water, no? Access to electricity. So imbes na mapunta yan doon sa basic social services na dapat libre or at least socialized ng gobyerno, ay napupunta sa debt service. Pero bakit ba mayroong tayong sinasabi driven development strategy or reliance on foreign loans and funding? Why does government in general want to continue such a cycle? Okay. So our national government outstanding debt as of April 2011, according to the Freedom from Debt Coalition, using $1 per 42.9 pesos was 109 billion US dollars, no? Or 4.7 trillion Philippine pesos. No? GMA borrowed 2.4 trillion from 2001 to 2005, more than the combined earnings of the Aquino, Ramos, and Estrada administrations. So tayo pong karaniwang mga mamamayan ang magbabayad ng utang na ito. Saan po napupunta yan? So, medyo familiar po tayo dito sa mga na-publicize na mga illegitimate debts natin. Either substandard po yung implement ng project or the project never materialized at all. Saan po ba talaga napupunta yung perang inuutang natin? Utang tayo, supposedly para dyan sa mga yan, pero saan yun napupunta? So nagiging utang natin yan. Okay, the latest of which, of course, is the PDAF scam and Napoles and the legislators, no? Okay. Environment. So bakit nga ba mahalaga ang environment o ang issue ng kalikasan o paggalang sa kalikasan sa karapatang pantao? No? Obvious na obvious nung nakaraang mga bagyo, especially yung Yolanda. Okay, dalawa po ang pag-uusapan nating environmental concerns. Yung una is yung mining, destructive mining, and the second, yung deforestation. Unang-una, of course, mining depletes our national reserves. Okay. Pangalawa, it also destroys the culture of our indigenous people. Okay? Their means of subsistence. Dahil pag pumasok ang isang mining company sa isang lugar dito sa ating bansa, ilang henerasyon po yung pamamalagi nila dyan. Okay? At syempre, hinihingkayat na sumama yung mga anak ng ating mga katutubo upang sa gayon ay maging workforce ng mining company na yon. At pag natapos na yung pagmimina, sira na rin yung pangkaraniwan at katutubong kaugalian sa paghahanap buhay. No? Alin po bang komunidad ang local community at indigenous people's community ang yumaman at umunlad nang umalis ang isang mining company? Sino po ba ang nakinabang? Okay. So, sino po ang nag-suffer? community. Paglikas na ng mining company. At sino ang nakinabang? Yung multinational company at kung sino mang may kaya na nagbigay pahintulot, may kapangyarihan na nagbigay pahintulot na sila ay magmina doon sa lugar na yon. Okay. So, bagamat ganon, agresibo pa rin ang ating Pinoy administration sa pag-promote at paghingkayat ng mining companies to come to the Philippines. Sagot niya ito sa kakulangan ng trabaho at kakulangan ng industriya, no? Ng manufacturing sector natin dito sa Pilipinas. So guminhawa po ba ang buhay ng mga taga-Subo pag-exit ng mining firms at sino ang nakinabang at sino ang apektado pag-alis nila? Okay. Ito po ang kagubatan ng Samar noong 1952. 86% pa po. Ang G1 po na apektado din, no, ay itong group of islands dito. Noong panahon ng Yolanda. (1978) po. Ayan na po siya in contrast with 1902. 1987. Okay. Wala na po akong slide pagkatapos ng 1987, but let us just use our imagination. No? So, ang karaniwang mamamayan po ba ang nakinabang din sa logs na ng ibang? Ito po, this is from the Philippine Human Rights Information Center po, PhilRights. Ito po, publication. Opo. So hanggang 1987 lang po yan, pero yung mga panahon po kasi na yan, angkat ang Japan ng sa atin. No? So, sino po ba ang nakinabang? At sino ang apektado ngayon na pag magkakaroon tayo ng delubyo? So, it is, of course, the local communities and the most vulnerable sections of our society na magsasuffer. No? Hindi po yung mga taong nakinabang sa pagkakalbo ng kagubatan na yan. So, yun ding kakulangan ng kakayanan ng ating national government to actually respond and rebuild capital starvation is, of course, still interlinked with corruption. No? Okay, the issue of warlordism, private armies, private armed groups, political clans, and dynasties. No? So, everybody is familiar with the Maguindanao Massacre. Pero sa ibang dako ng Pilipinas, lagana po ang warlordism at pagkakaroon ng private armies. At bakit pumapayag o nagbibigay pahintulot ang ating national government sa ganitong klaseng setup? Of course, ang ating presidente, Noynoy Aquino, has actually pronounced that he is working towards doing away with warlordism. No? Pero nung panahon ni PGMA, siya ay pumayag, no? Na ganyan na lamang ang naging kapangyarihan ng Ampatuan family. In exchange for ensuring that she has the votes needed. No? So, usong-uso din po yung private army sa Bicol and Negros regions, which are notorious for political and economic warlordism. No? Laganap din po ang kahirapan dyan at it's 2 out of 3 hotbeds of insurgency. So mas madali pong makahikayat ang New People's Army ng bagong miyembro sa mga lugar kung saan laganap ang kahirapan. No? So right to food po, no? So in March 2005, the Social Weather Station survey said 33% of Filipinos have inadequate food and 13.4% or 2.1 million Filipino families experienced hunger, which marked the highest ever hunger incidence in 20 years since 1985. Another SWS survey in February 2007 says that 1 in 5 Filipinos had gone hungry at least once in the past 3 months. So ito, medyo recent po itong figures from the NEDA, 23 July 2013 Hunger Summit. 1 out of 10 families experience hunger regularly or routinely. Okay, still on the right to food. So pagtaas po nung presyo ng karaniwang mga bilihin, no, ay siyang pagbaba din ng dekalidad ng ating kinakain ng karaniwang Pilipino o ng masang Pilipino. Pero madiskarte ang Pinoy, no? So mula sa ating regular na staple o pagkain na rice, bigas at isda at gulay, nagiging kanin, instant noodles na lang o kaya isaw. So ganun na lang tayo nag-a-adjust. At syempre, nakokompromiso din yung nutrition ng ating ng karaniwang mga mamamayan. No? Okay. Nakadikit din dyan o may kinalaman din dyan yung ating dwindling domestic support for rice by our national government. So we have not been rice self-sufficient for the last 15 years. Kailangan pa nating bumili ng bigas upang punuan ang ating pangangailangan mula sa ibang mga bansa. No? So only 43% of our irrigable fields are irrigated. Okay. On the right to work. So according to the Ibon Foundation, the living wage for a family of 6 in Metro Manila is 1,022 pesos. Yan po yung 100%. Yung minimum wage in June 2012 was 446 pesos or 43.63% of the 1,022 per day. Okay. Siyempre, magkaakibat yung dalawang problema na yan, yung poverty and unemployment. No? Unemployment remains a big problem with close to 6 million, 2.8 million in 2012, with close to completely out of jobs, 3 million completely out of jobs, and more than 15 million Pinoy living in yung sariling sikap, diskarte na lang. No? Living on a day-to-day diskarte. Walang kasiguruhang pagpasok ng income o pera para sa kanilang pang-araw-araw na pangangailangan. So, more than 200,000 nurses are jobless, no? According to the Professional Regulatory Commission. Bagong figures po yan. So, still on the right to work. So, pag-usapan po natin yung contractualization, also known as flexibilization or Pacquiao system or casualization. Pero however you want to call it, it provides our workers with less collective bargaining power and therefore less capacity to actually fight or struggle for fair working conditions and fair wages. No? So our top contractualizers are Mr. Henry C. of SM na every 5 months kailangan i-renew yung contract ng mga sales ladies and salesmen. And of the San Miguel Corporation, Mr. Danding Cujuango and Mr. Manny Pangilinan of PLDT. 7 out of 10 firms practice contractualization in the Philippines. At nung last na seminar natin, in fact, one of the participants in Muntinlupa mentioned the Herrera Law, which actually allows contractualization to persist in the Philippines. No? Okay. So dahil nga kulang sa trabaho dito sa Pilipinas, ang response ng ating gobyerno is mainly to export our workforce. No? So the biggest recruiter actually is the Philippine government, the Philippine Overseas Employment Agency. No? So basically, in January to October 2010, our overseas Filipino workers generated 15.4 billion US dollars to contribute to our economy. The total labor force in the Philippines was then 36,450,000. Those officially employed were 33,536,000. And there were 8.7 million Filipinos in 190 host countries. And about 3,000 Filipinos leave the Philippines daily. From January to September 2010, 1,079,221 OFWs left our country. So just to mention, select few long-term social drawbacks, of course, yung effect in the family as an institution, lalong-lalo na kung ang napilitang lumikas at maghanap ng trabaho abroad ay ang nanay. No? Yung dysfunctionality ng children, yung stability ng kanilang bringing. No? So may long-term social drawbacks yan for us as a society. So makikita natin, no, paigting ng paigting yung pagpapalabas ng ating workforce as each administration passes. Okay, so more on government's response. No? From in 2001, there were 5,600 call center agents. No? Business process outsourcing, mga call center agents. But you also have the less popular, of course, medical translation. No? Pero ito, call center agents, 5,600 nung 2001. Nung 2008, there were 372,000 of them. Okay. In 2001, that 5,600 call center agents generated 56 million US dollars. No? Contributed to our economy. Noong 2008, yung 372,000 contributed 6.1 billion US dollars. Mukhang napakalaki. Pero tingnan po natin kung significant siya. So in 2008, the BPO sector, call center agents, only contributed 1.1% of the total employment. Pinagmamalaki po ng ating gobyerno ito, no? Only 2% of the gross domestic product. So yung manufacturing sector at that same year shrunk to as small as in the 1950s, 23.1% of the gross domestic product. So considering isang parang pagpapatunay po na ang isang lipunan ay maunlad ay masigla at malakas ang kanyang manufacturing sector. Patay po ang manufacturing sector natin dito sa Pilipinas. Health services and medicines are currently provided for profit rather than for human need. So actually, dalawa pong health services natin dito sa Pilipinas, ang isa para sa mayaman, ang isa para sa mahirap. Simply because government still cannot sustain its hospitals. No? So, mas pupunta ka, gusto mo ng quality health service, pupunta ka sa private hospital. So yung sinasabing cheaper medicines law is a very much a pro-people's law. No? So, unfortunately, naging ganap na negosyo na ang serbisyong pangkalusugan. Actually, ganon din ang serbisyong pang-edukasyon. Merong private, merong public. So, okay. Informal settlers' right to housing. So, growing number of informal settlers. Old figures from 2000 to 2006, informal settlers in the National Capital Region increased by more than 81%. So yung structural setup po after EDSA, seemingly nagkaroon tayo ng isang demokrasya, no? Or a nominal democracy as we call it. So we're all familiar with the human rights violation on a massive scale under the Marcos dictatorship. Na, of course, in a small way, nako-correct ng ating compensation law or the RA 10368. But what EDSA merely did was to bring back the pre-martial law, nominal democracy, one person, one vote. Anybody can run for office, anybody can be elected, everybody can vote. Pero ganun kasimple lang po ba yun? No? The reality is that only a few have the financial capacity to run for office, no? Especially the national posts. There was merely a transfer of power from the Marcos and this Marcos regime and its cronies, another political and economic elite. So according to investigative documentaries, no, bago lang po ito, I think 5 episodes ago, 40 political families and affiliates in big business actually control 73% of political and economic power in the Philippines. So national politics has become big business and investments are being made during elections. And of course, so that corruption can happen, but more importantly, personal interest and the interest of their affiliates, those who invested in them as they were running for posts. No? Of course, nabanggit natin kanina yung destruction of the environment and the depletion of our natural resources continues. Okay, poor governance translating to poor basic services and opportunities for people to grow and develop. No? May big economic disparity between the vast majority, between the well-to-do and the vast majority who are poor. The saving grace is, of course, the sector that buttresses the Philippine economy. No? Government having a labor expert policy. So the survival of the system is actually dependent on keeping the vast majority poor, consciously or unconsciously. Okay, some may call it bureaucrat capitalism. So public service as a tool for amassing and expanding private property. No? So a government dominated by ruling elites who treat their public posts as business and profit-making ventures. A government that ruled on the basis of violence and deception through private armies and political dynasties and warlordism. Okay, on the international scale, kasi the Philippines does not exist in a vacuum. Apektado din tayo ng global situation. So let's see if governments still have the capacity to provide a level playing field between the private sector and public sector. Balance human need over profit and protect people from abuse, exploitation of big business. Ibig sabihin, government being able to discipline the private sector in favor of the interests of ordinary citizens. Okay, who makes the rules? The power behind the throne. Transnational corporations. They make nations compete to offer the lowest wages, environmental standards, taxes, etc. So sa mga mahihirap na bansa tulad ng Pilipinas, mamimili itong multinational corporations, mining corporations, kung saan pinakamababa yung environmental standards and kung saan cheapest yung labor. No? Investors can make or break a country by pouring money in or shutting off. Okay, the throne, international financial institutions, unelected quasi-governmental organizations that write the formal rules of the global economy. Governments, no, represent corporations and investors rather than the majority. So ano po ang pagkakaugnay-ugnay nito? Ang impact on human rights at bakit napakahalaga ng Commission on Human Rights as an institution and the establishment of human rights social infrastructure that the Rock and Roll Project seeks to do. No? I-review lang po natin, large part of the gross domestic product goes to debt servicing and of course, corruption, which causes capital starvation. Capital starvation in turn causes, of course, government to delegate its responsibilities, the most basic social services to the private sector. So this causes privatization and regulation of course, the utilities like water, electricity, dapat po, hanggat maaari, government-owned ito para maprotektahan yung interest ng consumers. Pero napaprivatize ito. Okay. At dapat ay libre o subsidized. Our right to health, education, and of course, our right to the commons, water, electricity, and housing. A debt-driven development strategy cycle enables the political elite to continuously borrow funds. No? Of course, the financial institutions that allow us to borrow also ask something in return for us to open our economic doors and liberalize. Hence, nababawasan yung protection ng ating mga karaniwang mga manggagawa at produce, no? Tulad ng ating mga sapatos. Industriya ng sapatos natin namatay dahil mas mura ang galing sa China, and so forth. The liberalization policies and free trade agreements as they call it, no? Free flow of foreign products and Philippine natural resources to foreign shores. No protection of local industries, products, and agricultural produce. Okay, sigla na according to latest data, statistics, yung ating manufacturing sector, pero hindi pa niya na-offset yung other remedies that government has chosen to apply with yung ating foreign labor export policy, for example. Big business is, of course, interlinked with political power. How are our legislators supposed to legislate pro-workers laws? Laws that would combat contractualization if they themselves have stake in big business, are profiting themselves from contractualization. Okay, because the basic social services are commodified, only the well-to-do are able to avail of quality service. So this system is basically subservient to private interest and profit over human needs. So assertion lang po sa sitwasyon na kung saan pataas ng pataas ang bilihin at pababa ng pababa ang dekalidad ng serbisyong panlipunan, ang lugi ng mga pinakapuspalad o ang mas nakatarami. Kung susuriin nating maigi, ang ganitong estrukturang panlipunan ay ugat ng karamihan ng ating mga suliraning panlipunan at paglabag sa karapatang pantao. So social inequalities as an obstacle to a life of dignity for all. Let me ask you a question. Would a son of a big businessman living in Forbes Park be born equal with a son of a carpenter? Equal po ba sila pinanganak? Okay. So lamang na po basta't hindi magbubulakbol yung anak ng isang negosyante na nakatira sa Forbes Park, sigurado na po na maayos ang magiging kinabukasan niya. At malamang siya pa ang maging employer nitong anak ng karpintero. Sa ibang bansa po, Western Europe, choice po ang pagiging karpintero. Hindi dahil sa kakawalan ng oportunidad. At ang isang anak na karpintero would go to the same school as the son of a doctor or a successful businessman. Hindi po dapat maging hadlang ang estado sa buhay para sa isang bata na paunlarin ang sarili niya. Hindi siya dapat lugi sa iba. Kaya dapat din pantay-pantay ang pagkakataon na makapag-aral sa iisang standard. So doon pa lang makikita nyo na yung oppressive setup in Philippine society and other societies all over the world. Dahil po may social inequalities na ganito at meron ding failure kasi minana lang naman ng Pinoy administration yung social ills of those who went before him. No? So kung may failure ang gobyerno to actually address social inequalities, what happens? Okay. So we're talking about making sure that the most basic needs of the people are met. And if they are not met, if the foundations of a life of dignity is not met, then you have social unrest and ills, resulting in the most severe civil and political rights violations. Okay. Environmental defenders, victims of extrajudicial killings because they wanted social change, no? Yan. Mr. Jackson Agustin and Dr. Jerry Ortega, no? So victims of enforced disappearances, no? Mr. Jonas Burgos. Victims of torture, sabihin ito si Mr. Lenin Salas. Sabihin na natin, aktivista siya, baka kaliwa aktivista. You would have people fighting for social change. Yun nga lang, ang tanong, kung tama yung pamamaraan. No? Ito, accused of ordinary crimes. Who would forget Police Inspector Binayog torturing Mr. Darius Evangelista? So as you can see, human rights violations find their roots in the deprivation of the most basic needs of the people. Mr. Lenin Salas, fighting for social change, sinashortcut ng military at ng police ang counterinsurgency efforts by torturing, doing something that is not allowed by law. Also, a shortcut to crime prevention and crime solving, si Mr. Darius Evangelista maybe having gone astray from the law, pero kalabisan yung pagtotorture at hindi dapat nangyari. So, human rights defenders, left activists, conflict victims in Mindanao, agrarian reform, activists and farmers, journalists, Davao vigilantism or death squads, ordinary citizens suspected of committing common crimes, and children in conflict with the law, of course, are amongst those. So, ang uso na po ngayon at mas nagiging public na yung term na impunity. No? What is impunity? Impunity is the impossibility of bringing perpetrators of violations to account, whether it be violators of human rights, or those people who stole from us, ordinary citizens. Whether in criminal, civil, administrative, or disciplinary proceedings, they are not subjected to inquiry that might lead to their being accused, arrested, or tried. And if found guilty, not sentenced to appropriate penalties and to making reparations to their victims. So, a new perspective for public servants, no? Kinikilala po namin napakahirap para sa ating grassroots public servants ang trabaho natin in communities. Unlike as compared to our counterparts in more well-to-do societies. No? It's difficult for barangay officials to undertake duties in a society with many systemic ills. So yung problems natin at the national level, corruption and inability of government to actually provide for the most basic services of the people, tayong apektado. You have urban poor communities that have so many social ills that we have to deal with. Balance, ensuring that there is public order and safety with human rights, for example. So gone are the days na ang human rights defenders ay galing sa mga hanay ng mga aktivista o mga kaliwa. Since we are the primary duty bearers tasked to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights, we should be the primary human rights defenders in the Philippines. May kaakibat ding kabayanihan. That is why we all, I guess, signed up for this. No? Is to serve the people. Breaking the silence to break impunity. If there are people amongst our ranks who had committed torture o iba pang kalabisan na labag sa karapatang pantao, dapat magsalita tayo. No? So we all want public servants and institutions our children can trust. So we should all see to it that we bring to justice and help reform those who go legally astray without any excesses. No? So just a few points before I end. The basic right-based premise on the nature of human beings in relation to responding to crime. No? Makakasalubong po natin ito sa trabaho natin. Human rights action officers. Each human being is born good. Each human being's character is formed through social conditioning. No? Brutalized by communities o pinagyaman ng mga komunidad. However it goes. Since we together form the quality of communities we live in, it is our collective responsibility to restore uprightness of erring individuals. No? So hindi siya dapat basta-basta parusahan, no, patayin, no? O takutin. So genuine social order is dependent on decent living conditions, not a climate of fear or repression. So yung style ni Mr. Binayog, sinasabi niya kasi kailangan nila ng disiplina sa tundo, pasaway sila, ay taliwas dito sa premise na ito. No? There is a direct relationship between the decrease of crime incidents and the rise of standard of living. So hindi pagtotorture at hindi kalabisan ang sagot sa problema, sa krimen. No? In a social setting with decent living conditions, heinous crimes are the exception. So again, a life of dignity is ensuring that the foundations of a life of dignity, human rights, is the last solution rather than torture and other excesses. No? Civilized society should have no place for desperate and irrational solutions such as torture. Bringing back the death penalty, may efforts po, sama-sama po nating hadlangan ito, and even the lowering of the age of discernment. No? So becoming aware of a system that thrives on social and economic inequality allows us, duty bearers on the ground, to better understand the situation of the people we are serving and the importance of our role in the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights. So napakahalaga po that we break the silence and become vocal on human rights. No? So let us all become human rights defenders as we undertake our task as human rights action officers in the city of Muntinlupa. So that's basically it for the prevailing conditions in the Philippines, human rights situation. Thank you. gusto mong gawin to?